Every evening at 8 p.m. for 96 years, the Ypres Fire Brigade have bugled the last post in honor of the 55,000 men from the world over whose bodies still lie somewhere in the battlefields of Flanders. Between 1914 and 1918, this city saw 3 massive battles rage around it, and a constant daily routine of slaughter by the deadliest of weapons, from gas to flamethrowers and massive underground explosions, in a war fought from above the clouds to the depths of the earth. This low hill with its military cemeteries was the site of the largest man-made explosion of the First World War. For the first time since Germany invaded France and Belgium, the British and Commonwealth forces pushed their enemy off the high ground. More than 10,000 German soldiers died in the massive blast.
The German troops could hear them blowing off these huge mine craters, and they weren't sure whether they were sitting on one as well. They were going off all over the place. Just imagine. Terrifying.
Andy Hawkins and Julia Richardson are archaeologists of the Durand Group in England and tunnel experts. They have come to explore the areas around Ypres to better understand what life was like for soldiers digging the tunnels on both sides of the front. One of the tunnellers who worked on these mines was Geoffrey Boothby, 21 years old, a second lieutenant in the British Army. In November 1915, he wrote this to his girlfriend Edith.
Darling, how are you? I'm in fine form, although in the trenches, muddy from head to foot. Enemy reported working 2 yards from our gallery, which meant yours truly lying on his tummy in sodden clay for half an hour and hearing nothing. Second scare that the Boche was breaking into our gallery, so I had to explore with much shaking at the knees, a revolver and no light.
Here by the deep mine of 1916 at St Eloi, east of Ypres, Andy and Julia meet Hilda Verboven, a landscape archaeologist who is the local expert on the mines of the area. She will be their guide to the massive craters left by the explosions that were characteristic of this front.
In order to see the way the war changed the landscape, we just have to look at the aerial photographs of the past. Old pictures. And when you show the pictures to people, you see the impact they have on the people. Not only back then, but also today. When you see the total destruction, then you realize what it really meant to be living through the war on the front.
The St Eloi tunnels were the first deep tunnels built by the British, and one of the officers leading the underground campaign was Second Lieutenant Geoffrey Boothby, who wrote letters to his girlfriend Edith. His story takes us back to the dreaming spires of Oxford University. Professor Arthur Stockwin found this mysterious box in his father's home.
This is an old cake box, I think, chocolates maybe, and it had all these letters in it. This is a typical envelope, and here is one of the letters from Geoffrey Boothby to my mother, as she later became.
From training camp, the young Geoffrey Boothby wrote,
"Mud, huts, desolation and Tommies, nothing else unless I include them, bugles which go all night and day, mostly with wrong notes."
More mud greeted him on his arrival on the front, close to Ypres, Ypres in Flemish, Ypres to the British. Britain had been drawn into the war when the German army attacked France in August 1914 through neutral Belgium. During the strategic retreat of October 1914, a furious battle raged around Ypres. Today, the spires of the Flemish city have been entirely rebuilt. 100 years ago, the city remained free, but was razed to the ground by German guns.
After the retreat from the Marne, the Germans withdrew 100 kilometers, and obviously remained where it was easiest to resist. The front that was created during the race to the sea was just the result of chance.
The Germans occupied the low ridge that overlooks the city, leaving the defending French and British in the wet lowlands. The bulge in the line became known as the Ypres salient, and periodically became the scene of the most ferocious fighting. The Menin Gate Memorial is one of the city's entrances. Andy's great-uncle was killed near Ypres, and his body never found.
Because I have a great-uncle who was killed here at Ypres. And he's commemorated. He was serving with the Royal Welsh. This is panel 37. And if you look, he is a Hawkins. He's a Hawkins John Thomas John.
Fighting from the trenches was a form of warfare neither army had prepared for. The hastily dug lines soon became a labyrinth of mud. Modern weapons made frontal attack impossible, even suicidal.
If we look at today's wars in the Western world, for example in Afghanistan or Iraq, we read that several thousands of soldiers die over the course of a year. But this was the average for an infantry regiment during the First World War.
The no man's land between the British and German trenches was haunted by unburied bodies, snipers, and machine gun nests. Even the relative safety of the trenches was violated by grenade and mortar shells. The cemeteries filled up with a constant flow of dead. Dieter Storz is the curator of the First World War exhibit at the Bavarian Army Museum in Ingolstadt.
The life of the private soldier in the First World War is an incredible enigma. The more we try to understand it, the more elusive it gets. In other words, how could men live for such a long time in conditions that they could not survive or come away from without wounds that would have changed the course of their lives? The psychological stress must have been enormous.
Die psychische Belastung muss extrem gewesen sein.
The tunnels and mines of Ypres had an unlikely beginning in Manchester, England. It was there that civil engineer John Norton Griffith was overseeing the digging of tunnels for sewers that ran under the city. He convinced the British government that the so-called clay-kicking technique his men were using to dig those sewers could also be used to build tunnels under the German lines and blow them up. In early 1915, he was sent with his own battered Rolls-Royce to recruit and train new units of tunnelers.
The miner sits over here, and instead of using an axe or a pickaxe, he just uses his legs and his feet to dig into the clay. And that was a smoother way of digging, a faster way of digging. Results were better because it was quieter as well. And noise is very important in mining, because when the enemy heard you digging, it was very dangerous. They started mining, countermining.
The Germans had been the first to explode a mine under a company of Indian soldiers, and found that the particular terrain of the Belgian plain posed special problems. On the higher ground, the terrain was wet and soft, and often their vertical shafts would be crushed by the water pressure. So they took to using cement walls, which was slow and laborious. Once in Belgium, British tunnellers began putting the new technique to work immediately, with astounding results. The tunnels were built more quietly and faster. Although the Germans occupied the softer, sandy high ground, the hard clay in the plain favoured the British. Working alongside the 25,000 tunnellers in France were attached infantry, such as Geoffrey Boothby, whose letters give us a feel for the human tragedy that was war. He was a dentistry student at Birmingham University and had joined the South Staffordshire Regiment as a young officer in the patriotic spirit fostered by Lord Kitchener's famous call to arms.
Not till this evening have I realised what a terrible place the firing line is. I might be shot, or shelled, or gassed, or bombed. I may fall into a deserted trench and be left to drown. What if they blow a mine? What if aeroplanes start dropping hate? What if? But why continue? I could write a volume of what-ifs.
The mood does darken as time goes on in his letters. He does start off, before he actually goes to the front, saying, this is going to be the greatest adventure of my life. When he gets to the front, when he's really in the firing line in the trenches and later in the tunnels, his mood does definitely darken.
Because of especially the water and the cold and the narrow shafts. Imagine that you have to work over there for 8 hours, nearly seeing something. The constant fear of countermining, of breaking into the tunnels. It must have been terrible.
The clay kicking technique involved a three-man team. One man was the kicker, who lay on a plank and kicked into the tunnel face. One was a bagger, who filled sandbags with debris, and the other was a trammer, who transported the bags out. Tunnellers on both sides faced a variety of risks. The British tunnels ran through clay just above the water table. If the table was breached, the tunnel would fill up and diggers drowned. Carbon monoxide from explosives and burning candles also silently killed the tunnellers. But the biggest danger of all was the enemy.
He goes down with others of his company and they discover a German telephone type instrument. He knows it's German because it has the word unten at the bottom of it. He realizes that in fact the Germans have penetrated into the British tunnel. 3 of us went down again, intent on bagging the instrument. Myself in the lead, as I had an electric torch and rifle, followed by a corporal, the RE officer bringing up the rear. These saps are 4 foot high by 3 broad, so you haven't much room for fancy antics. And the one we were in had 18 inches of water in it. The water made a frantic noise around our legs. Well, we got round a slight bend leading into the strait into which the Bosch gallery came at right angles, when suddenly, as the penny horribles say, a shot rang out. Only it didn't ring. In the confined space, all we got for our money was a fight for boop from a revolver. Eventually, both sides prepare a blow-up of the tunnel. They stockpile explosives. And as he puts it at the end, we got off our blow first. Some sport, what?
Men were losing their lives by the hundreds on the surface too.
The characteristic of the Western Front was the terrible density of firepower, this concentration of machine guns and artillery in a restricted space of cannons and machine guns per kilometre of front. This certainly caused a stalemate on the front.
There were 4 low hills that thousands of men fought and died for. Hill 60, Mount Sorrel, Hill 61 and Hill 62. These trenches are all that is left of the British defences on Hill 62.
Generally, you wouldn't see this wriggly tin used to support the trench edges. There's a number of other features, the size of them, the fact we don't have the fire step.
Yes, because at the moment, whilst this particular level is quite low and you can see over, as soon as you come further round, it gets much deeper.
But you wouldn't have your frontline trenches that low, would you? Ideally, you'd have them built up higher,
well, certainly
at least above your head.
Yes, and that's why you need the fire step to actually get up to enable you to sort of see over the top, so that you can engage the enemy. Ah, Julia, look.
What have you got?
We have a representation of a tunnel.
Oh yeah, a nice
system.
Concrete-sided one.
Yeah.
Actually, the height's not too bad. You said it's about, maybe it's a bit higher than 5 foot.
Yeah.
So that's your general size if you were swinging a pick.
Yep.
Clay picker's about 4'3", I think.
Yeah, something like that.
A pick was 5'2".
I've got a torch. Shall we go and have a look?
Let's have a look, definitely. Shall we go first with your torch and I can follow?
Okay. Yeah, well, they've kept it fairly square, so it really gives you that impression.
It certainly does, doesn't it, coming in here?
Yeah, and the water, the water definitely gives you that feel, doesn't it?
And you start to feel that kind of closing in sensation as well, the deeper you go in. We just imagine that they were the wooden panels that they put in. It's not done too differently, really, is it?
Well, it's not, because they had to close what we call close board.
That's because of the wet clay, isn't it? It was a particular technique that they developed for this area to stop the clay seeping in underneath and collapsing the panels.
Yeah, because the clay has no integral structure, and so it just, when it gets wet, just becomes liquid and then just moves. So it's essential that you board all the way around to give you that protection. You can see here where there's a gap, just here. You can see the earth either side of you. Yeah.
So you really are battling against all the odds, aren't you, if you're tunnelling? Not just from the fact that you're in a war, so you've got other sides trying to undermine you.
Yeah.
But you're battling nature.
Yes, and of course this particular battlefield was, you never had mining as such because they don't have the natural sort of minerals to mine out, and because the water table's so high, that sort of pneumatic and hydraulic pressure is just on it all the time.
Caterpillar Hill overlooks Hill 60 on the other side of the railway line to Ypres, a strategic viewpoint for the Germans. In spring 1915, the British found that the clay under Hill 60 was relatively dry and began an underground attack in that direction with 5 tunnels. Every precaution was taken to keep the operations secret from the Germans on the hill. The engineers worked from second-line trenches, which they shared with their infantry comrades. The tunnels were tiny, sometimes just 90 centimetres high. They were designed to rise slightly so that they would not pierce the water table, which rose and fell with the weather. The mines were packed with either 900 or 1,200 kilos of gun cotton. On the 17th of April 1915, the mines were exploded by electric detonators. They blew open the German front line. The British occupied Hill 60 with the loss of only 7 men. However, the British did not take Caterpillar, a tactical mistake. Just 4 days after the explosion, the massive German advance west of Ypres began with a chlorine gas attack against French colonial regiments.
They used chlorine gas, so a chemical substance that did not need other modifications. Then, over time, other chemical substances were developed that were based on byproducts of the paint industry, which was very advanced in Germany.
The chlorine fumes bonded with water in the eyes and lungs to make hydrochloric acid, literally burning the victims' eyes and innards. It was another of the growing number of horrors of the war to be unleashed against soldiers on both sides.
So chemical weapons developed in a variety of ways. In the end, firing shells loaded with chemical substances became the preferred method. And the number of chemical munitions produced by the Germans increased during the war.
The British pulled back from Hill 60 under fire from Caterpillar and under the pressure of the German gas attacks. The German engineers proceeded to build bunkers and pillboxes to defend the strategic height better. To the east of Ypres stood the remains of the castle of Hoche. It had been destroyed in 1914, and the British had dug in around it, turning it into a formidable redoubt. A German bunker close by, however, kept soldiers in the defensive position on edge. Once the German attack on the Ypres salient of April 1915 was over, the British High Command decided to push back the German line as far as possible. Tunnellers began digging a 60-metre tunnel in order to place a massive charge of a new explosive, ammonal, under the enemy bunker. It exploded at 7 p.m. on the 19th of July 1915, creating a 6-metre deep crater. British infantry occupied the westward rim and entrenched, only to be pushed back 10 days later by a massive German counterattack using flamethrowers. Once again, the mine had worked its miracle, but the line could not be held. Once again, the Germans dug into the crater, which had become a perfect defensive structure. In June 1916, the German Württemberg Corps attempted to gain possession of 3 hills held by the British, nicknamed Mount Sorrel, Hill 61 and Hill 62. By now the British Empire was pouring soldiers into the war. Here it was the Canadians who bore the brunt of the fighting. 4 German tunnels stretched under the no man's land and exploded under the trenches occupied by the Canadian infantry after a heavy artillery barrage. Resistance was minimal. Once again, the effectiveness of mining was proved. Eventually, the Canadian Corps counterattacked after massive artillery bombardment and retook the positions. Second Lieutenant Geoffrey Boothby continued sending letters to his girlfriend Edith throughout 1915 and requested a transfer to the Royal Engineers.
Times his jocularity breaks down and he says things like, you know, we really don't worry about what's happening to any other people around here. You know, it's just we are concentrating on our own problems and our own issues. And then he talks about having just nearly been shot by a sniper's bullet or something like that. And, you know, he's jocular about that, but obviously it was shocking to him.
On the Ypres plain, the so-called blue clay was perfect for clay kicking and proved relatively stable. However, when the British decided to go deep, they too encountered the treacherous wet layers. The British devised a system using cylindrical steel shafts, known as tubbing. It allowed the British to go much deeper into the Flanders mud, where their enemy thought tunnelling was impossible.
Steel tubs. I hope it's the right
That's
word.
good. Close enough. Steel rings.
Okay. Yes, steel rings. Yes. Different segments, which have been placed one on top of the other, and so the shafts sink into the ground.
Right.
Just to get through those difficult layers, and once they reached a stable, dry clay layer, they started reusing woodland, for example, to dig tunnels and so on.
In the traditional sense.
Yeah.
Geoffrey Boothby sent his photograph to Edith before he was transferred to the Royal Engineers and moved north to a new part of the front.
This is from Edith to Geoffrey, dated the 29th of March 1916, from Beechcroft, 1 Beech Lanes, Birmingham. Jeff, dearest, I've got your photo in front of me just now, and I can hardly take my eyes off it, even to write to you. I didn't know anything could make anybody so happy. I'm afraid I can't describe to you what I think about it. You'll just have to imagine it. I've been doing nothing but think and dream dreams about it ever since I got it.
She was delighted, but as she wrote her reply, he was writing to her in more sombre tones.
Nearly all my friends in the Staffords have been killed in the fighting around Ypres a few weeks ago. It's a horribly sad thing how many friendships can be made and broken by this war.
In March 1916, when these mines, this is one of the four, no, one of the six that exploded. Three have remained. So this one shows for the very first time how deep British engineers can enter. Can go.
In 1916, Geoffrey Boothby was sent to the Ypres salient to participate in the first experiment with a deep tunnel, a prelude to the massive tunnelling offensive that was to come. The British tunnellers of the 177th Tunnelling Company, Royal Engineers, Boothby's new unit, dug under the village of St Eloi.
As you go deeper, you need to have more explosive.
Yeah.
And what we see, I think, is a transition from gun cotton into a substance called ammonol, which is based on ammonium nitrate. So it's predominantly 95% ammonium nitrate, 96% ammonium nitrate, TNT flake inside it, and aluminium to give it sort of the oxygen and the fuel that it needs. And that you can produce in thousands and thousands of pounds.
The explosions were not only to attack enemy trenches, but also to create better defences. Mine craters made excellent fortified defence positions.
This area was covered by shallow mines, not compared to the ones south, which are deep mines. Maybe this crater is caused by a mine that was already bigger, deeper than ever before. A crater like this. This one exploded in no man's land, but it was always a matter of trying to conquer it as the first.
Yeah, get to the lip.
Yes.
Yeah, the rush.
And as soon as they got in and consolidated the crater, they started digging tunnels towards the enemy front line, just to get closer and closer again.
The main danger underground was the enemy. Over time, a detection system was devised, a sensitive stethoscope that magnified vibrations in the earth, called a geophone. This instrument used two wooden discs with a layer of mica and mercury to amplify vibrations in the earth. By moving the discs around, the listener could hear the direction of the vibrations, so the source of the potential enemy threat. Tunnellers of all nations used small explosive charges called camouflages to blow up enemy attack tunnels, using sandbags to tamp the small mine, ensuring all the explosive energy blew upwards. Hilda Verboven is an archaeologist specialised in the impact of conflict on the landscape. She uses British and German trench maps to identify the entrances to the tunnels to gain a glimpse of what life was like for those men who worked for days on end underground.
We started from the trench maps that date back to 1914 in order to be able to identify the location of craters. The tunnels and the shafts were not indicated on the maps, but we went to look in other archives to find them, just as we did with this map. It's a British map from 1917, and it shows where the entrance to the tunnels and the stairs were. Today, we can't find entrances to the tunnels anymore. They are underground, and the tunnels are also underground. But what we can do is to locate where the tunnels and shafts are using these old maps.
After St Eloi, Geoffrey Boothby was moved to Railway Wood to the north. These maps of the trenches and galleries around Railway Wood give us a clear indication of the tunnels Geoffrey Boothby was working in. It was here that he was in charge of Gallery 11A.
There was a constant war going on between the tunnellers, essentially blowing up each other's tunnels. But this was not one of the various battles of Ypres. It was a sort of daily thing that was going on.
Boothby was due to go on leave in May 1916 a year and a half since he had seen Edith. He was awoken at 7 a.m. of the 28th of April 1916 by a soldier pulling at his sleeve. One of his comrades picks up the story.
They went to the mine together, your son in front with a corporal, with another officer a little way behind. No sooner had your son got to the face that the enemy blew their mine and buried your son and the corporal, while the shock blew the other officer away. Death was, of course, instantaneous.
By mid-1916, the British engineers had so improved their techniques that they could plan a long-term campaign to break the deadlock on the surface. It was the start of what would be the Messines Ridge campaign, and it would last for months. In 1917, a new general on the northern sector of the Western Front, Herbert Plumer, believed he could break through the lines. The harsh lessons of the Somme had been learned, and the plan was to attack on a narrow front with flexible support from heavy artillery. The Allies relied on an accurate survey of the enemy artillery positions and a barrage of massed heavy guns and machine guns in support of the Australians and New Zealanders attacking uphill. They would be backed up by a new weapon, the tank.
We're here on the Messines Ridge. That was obviously a very important ridge that the Germans held. The British lines would have been just behind that cemetery that we can see there, so very close. Okay. So they're part of a major battle. It took 18 months to plan. It involved 19 mines that went off. Right. There was a 17-day artillery barrage before these mines were set. So out of the 19, they were all set around a 10-minute period, but they weren't set off in line. Okay. They were set off randomly.
In the months before, the engineers had discovered that the blue clay that ran under the ridge was perfect for clay kicking, and Plumer ordered no less than 22 mines to be dug. Most of them had already been begun, but now they were to become operational. It was imperative that the British win the underground war. Both sides knew that the other was digging. When it became clear that the Germans were on the lookout for British mines, the deadly game of cat and mouse under the pockmarked surface of no man's land began. The Australian and British diggers tunnelled on different levels to distract the Germans. The water table was a constant threat as tunnels flooded and had to be evacuated. The Germans discovered one mine already laid, which the British abandoned, the Petite Douve Farm mine. The British engineers continued to build tunnels in every direction to try to dupe the Germans, who were forced to dig through the softer upper layers of sand downwards and under the British galleries. Work was as silent and as secret as possible. They used sophisticated drilling and excavating machinery, as they often had to consolidate the side of the tunnel with concrete.
So if we walk up here, now we're roughly in the area of the German lines. Right. They would have probably followed roughly the track of the road here.
Now, having sort of had a little look at some of the statistics for this particular mine. Yeah. It was started in January 16 and finished in June 16. Right. The Royal Engineers dug 520 metres through the clay. Wow. Ended up underneath this position at about 27 metres deep. Okay. And laid then something like 42,000 kilograms.
So a huge charge.
Of charge. Yeah. And it was ammonol, the explosive used by the British, which is a very powerful explosive. Gives a very big lifting effect.
So being so far deep down, you needed something like ammonol to really produce the effect.
The German front line stood on the forward slope of the hill, looking over the city of Ypres and the British lines, but was manned by only a third of the defending troops. The rest were located in an intermediate line. However, British bombardment in the days before the Battle of the Messines was so heavy and so accurate that the trenches and machine gun posts were almost obliterated. British aircraft flew overhead to spot the German artillery batteries, which were shelled. The tunnelling campaign in preparation for the 1917 attack had begun more than a year before. The Ypres salient was to have been the ideal jumping-off point for a massive British thrust aimed at capturing the Belgian ports of Ostend and Zeebrugge, but had to be postponed for a year while the Somme offensive continued. It was an underground war, which the Allies won. General Plumer had ordered 22 tunnels to be dug under the German defences, running from a position south of the Messines Ridge at Plugsteert Wood to the northernmost mine under the Caterpillar and Hill 60. At 3:10 a.m. on the 7th of June 1917, the mines exploded, killing outright 10,000 German soldiers of the Bavarian and Württemberg divisions. The largest of all the craters was this, at Spanbroek-Molen, which was so powerful that it also killed a handful of British soldiers as they advanced, a few seconds too early. Today, it is known as the Pool of Peace.
Just the shock effect of something this size going off underneath and behind your lines.
Absolutely.
You know, they must have just been terrified.
Yeah.
Those that survived, of course.
On both sides as well.
Yeah.
We always think about, well, we talk about the effect on the German troops, but the British troops waiting to attack, they probably never witnessed anything like this either, and probably equally as terrifying, and not necessarily trusting that the spoil heap wasn't going to collapse on them as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So both sides terrified, yeah. And the blast was so big along this ridge that they were heard in London. That's how big this was.
Hill 60 was blown up again, this time by the Australian engineers. The Germans had discovered the tunnels, but too late. Under the accurate British rolling barrage, which moved slowly just ahead of the advancing infantry, the Canadian, Australian and New Zealand troops moved forward and captured first the German front line and then, to everyone's surprise, the second line too. In just 6 hours, the German defences were ripped apart. British troops bypassed pockets of resistance such as these pillboxes, while German counterattacks were stopped in the open by accurately aimed artillery barrages. The 19 mines of Messines delivered a decisive blow against the German lines, and for the first time in the war, they were exploded at the start of a coordinated attack. Troops were ready to fully exploit the temporary advantage. The German officers and soldiers were determined to counterattack and recover lost ground, but for once the British were prepared. Both sides learned from the experience. The Germans developed a new line of defence and more flexible tactics, and the British believed they had found the answer to the problems of trench warfare.
Firepower had increased decisively. While mobility had remained the same, conditioned by the speed of soldiers walking, and this was integrated by logistics with heavy transport and eventually by tanks, which still took a couple of years to become a decisive weapon. And another important factor was the concentration of this firepower in a very limited sector of the front.
Die Konzentration dieser Feuerkraft auf einen relativ engen Frontabschnitt.
However, in the Third Battle of Ypres, also known as the Battle of Passchendaele, which the Supreme Commanders hoped would break the deadlock once and for all, the magic formula failed. Heavy rain and the destruction of ancient drainage systems turned the battlefield into a quagmire, where even tunnelling was impossible. The Germans counterattacked, and in spring 1918 reconquered all the terrain they had lost in the Battle of Messines, in an offensive that nearly won them the war.
The main problem the Germans had was obviously that they were numerically inferior. Germany had a strong industry, but the sum of the industries of its enemies, and especially the American industry, was significantly greater. With regards to equipment, during the war, the Germans may have been stronger in some specific single sectors of the front, but altogether they were always generally weaker.
America's entry into the war in 1917 would make victory impossible for the Germans. The heavily cratered landscape of the Flanders plain also hides secret dangers. Not all the mines exploded, and some have been lying in their dark and humid mine chambers for nearly a century.
To be honest, we can just hope that nothing will ever happen with them, and that there will never be any consequences. We will have to wait and see what the future brings. I know that there is a farm that's been built above a probable mine, and that is in the area of the Peckham mine. Let's hope that most of the explosive has been removed. But we can never be sure of that, and it will be impossible to find out.
The area around Ypres has been scarred, like the lives of the men who fought there and of their loved ones. Edith was Arthur Stockwin's mother.
Throughout from my whole childhood, an image of my mother, which is absolutely normal. And I don't know, children never really think of their parents as lovers in a way, and to realise that my mother had a relationship of this kind, although clearly not consummated, if one could put it in that sense, was simply amazing. I mean, it meant that I had to recalibrate in a curious kind of way the image that I had of my mother. Dearest, I wonder when giant circumstance will allow us to meet again. I'm a little more satisfied now that I have your photo, but only a little. My imagination wanders even more often than before in the realms of fancy and romance. But please don't let us wonder what we shall think of one another when we do meet. That sometimes rather frightens me. Besides, sufficient for the day is the goodness thereof, isn't it? Your madness gives me the most wonderful sensation of happiness. I hope that it is absolutely immortal. Good night, dear one. I still have to say good night to my photo. Yours, Edith.
The tragic notes of the last post ring out over the gate which faces eastwards, where some of the bloodiest fighting of the 4-year conflict took place. The last shell fell on Ypres on the 14th of October 1918. 500,000 soldiers of both sides were killed, and many are still unaccounted for today, 100 years later. Men like Geoffrey Boothby sent home to wives, mothers and girlfriends letters and pictures that still today remind us of the horror that is war.